I guess we'll get started. Can you guys hear me okay? Hello. My name is Omid Habib. Welcome to AppSphere. Welcome to Vegas. I am on the product marketing team. Welcome to the PHP, Node.js, and Python deep dive. So my name is Omid. I'm on the product marketing team. I originally joined AppDynamics as a product manager a few years ago, where I had the pleasure of bringing out the PHP, Node.js, and Python agents to market. I most recently, a few months ago, joined the product marketing team. So I was given the opportunity to help now work on outbound activities and messaging and work with customers like you guys on the same agents that I helped bring to market. So today we're going to do a deep dive on these particular agents. Now, PHP, Node.js, Python, they're three different programming languages, different ecosystems, different runtimes. They do share some commonalities in that they're dynamic languages, of course, but each of them have their own minor nuances. So what we're going to do today is we're going to jump into what came out in 2015. So for those of you who are interested in knowing what you haven't seen come out in the press, in the press releases and also the release notes, I'll give you guys a high-level overview as to what each language came out with since last year's AppSphere. Then we'll jump into PHP, Node.js, and Python. So what I did for this particular presentation is I chose a marquee feature from each one of these that I thought was impactful in terms of the problem that it was solving, and also the customer benefit that you guys are going to see value from. So for each one of these, there are some features that do cross over and some of them that don't. So I'll point those out. And then afterwards, we'll chat about some trends that I've actually noticed. And I wanted to include that because I think it's important. These different ecosystems, like I said, do share some commonalities. And that commonality in both culture and processes and even tools are some things that I've actually noticed having worked with customers like you guys in the past few years. So I wanted to chat a little bit about that and how it may possibly impact you guys. And then what I'll do is give you guys a sneak peek as to what's been being worked on for our 4.2 release. So by a show of hands, how many of you guys are PHP, Node.js, or Python customers? Okay, cool, awesome, fantastic. Okay, so what I like to do is, it's not as large of a crowd, so I'm not going to keep the questions towards the end. So if you guys do have questions, definitely raise your hand. If I don't see you, feel free to shout out, hey, Omi, I have a question. So we can keep the questions relevant to the topic so that there's clarification. And I'm not so sure if I'll have time towards the end anyway, so I like to get the questions during the talk. I'll pause in the middle of slides or after particular slides and look around for questions, so feel free to raise your hands. Cool. All right, 2015. So for PHP, we came out with cross-app correlation. This was a pretty awesome feature that the APM platform actually came out with. Java saw it first, as with most features actually. Python, PHP, and Node.js actually support it now. But PHP saw it in 4.1, so that was really beneficial for customers with extremely large environments. Backend naming rules was a pretty big in-demand feature for customers, again, with very, very large environments. And you'll notice a theme here when I say large environments. A lot of the features that we have come out with are for environments that are obviously extremely large. And the features that we do come out with, configuration or support-wise, are to help you guys bring control to that massive chaos. And we'll chat a bit about what I mean by that here in a bit. Data collectors, for those of you guys interested in more insight in your snapshots as to what's going on the header side. PHP 5.6. Anybody interested in upgrading to PHP 7? They're going to, okay, maybe. Okay, cool. So it's a huge contender to HHVM, HHVM being the runtime that Facebook built from the ground up. It was originally hip-hop for PHP, then they rebuilt that thing from the ground up, and they call it HHVM now. But PHP 7, I'd love to chat with you guys afterwards to see what your criteria are for making that decision. But we are committed to supporting that next year, so pretty excited about that as well. But PHP 5.6 is the last release for the 5 series. PHP will skip version 6 and go to 7 straight. And API functions, I'm going to deep dive into that here in a bit, so I won't talk too much about it right now. But PHP did release support for it this year. For Node.js, same thing, more configuration, more support for larger environments. So this guy right here, got a laser pointer right there, object instance tracking. This one's interesting, and I'm going to deep dive into that as well here in a bit. But what we've noticed from large-scale enterprise Node.js environments is that they're prone to memory leaks, and AppDynamics took it upon itself to try to solve that problem. So that's something that I'm going to actually deep dive in for Node.js. So those of you guys who are running Node.js or have converted to Node.js or built applications from the ground up in Node.js, you may have possibly noticed that your memory is probably maxing out on your servers. And if you're doing hard restarts on your runtime to solve the problem, you may actually want to probably diagnose your memory leak. So we'll jump into how AppDynamics can help you guys do that here in a bit. Node.js 0.12 support was released this year. As you guys know, the Node.js project itself actually had a fork happen pretty recently, io.js. I won't go into the details about it. I actually wrote a blog about it if you guys are interested in knowing about it. But in short, those two projects reconverge back together. And the converged version is starting at 4.0. They're already at 5.0. And we're going to be supporting 4.0 and 5.0 in our winter release here in January. Node.js customers, by show of hands? Okay, awesome. A lot of you guys. Anybody interested in converting to Node.js or adopting it in their environments? Okay, cool, awesome. All right, API functions, you'll notice a theme here. So there's some commonalities among the languages, and we're going to deep dive into that here in a bit, so I'm pretty excited about that. For Python, so we did GA Python this year. Very excited about that as well. We released the alpha late last year. We did demo it in AppSphere last year, went through a fantastic beta, and GA'd the product this year. We have, these are core APM features, distributed transaction correlation, of course, cross-app correlation, that's a big one, and further configuration and support for different environments. We do support Python 2.6 and 2.7. We've committed to Python 3 for next year, so that's pretty cool. I don't see that much Python 3 in the field, though. We've had some asks for it, but for all intents and purposes, you guys would probably agree it's practically almost a different language. So it's a different topic of conversation. And API functions. So there's a commonality. We will deep dive into that here in a bit, and I'll explain further what I mean by that. Okay, so PHP. For each one of the agents, I'm going to kind of set the stage with a challenge. In this particular instance for PHP, our challenge was multiple PHP applications running on a single server. So I'm going to set the stage with the challenge, and then what I'll do is talk about how we solve for that and what the feature actually is and what the solution is that we're proposing forward. Now for PHP, the way that AppDynamics currently handles PHP applications on a single instance is it'll take all of the different PHP apps on a single server, and it'll report it as a single application in the controller. Okay? Now the definition of application is relative, obviously, right? So a developer application could be anything from the entire server to the different virtual hosts that are running, right, in a lot of different instances, and I include a little visual help here. So let's take, for example, acme.com. At acme.com, this is a PHP stack. They do run different applications that are separated by subdomains, in this case API.login, etc. Each one of these applications is a PHP app, different team, different code base, different team, different responsibilities. They may talk to each other, right? They may consume each other, but the code base is actually separated. Now today, all 4 of these would actually report as the same application in AppDynamics. A little frustrating. If you're different teams, you want to see your own set of individual business transactions, right? You want to have your own set of configurations. Question? Good question. Are these seen as the same application because they're on the same server or the same domain? The short answer is that they're seen as the same application because they're all sharing the same PHP instance. So to answer your question, same server. So the need there is pretty obvious. We want to have different configurations, in some cases even different controllers. In some cases, let's say take for example API dot, you want to have that application broken up into two different applications, okay? Now, the different ways that you can configure this are infinite. You could probably say, okay, I want all of them in the same application, but I want them to be 4 different nodes under the same tier. I want them to be 4 different nodes under 4 different tiers under the same application. 4 different nodes, 4 different tiers, 4 different applications, or 4 different nodes, 4 different tiers, 4 different controllers for that matter, okay? So the way that we solve for this is what we're calling multi-node support. And so n applications on the same server equals 1 application AppDynamics. That's how it works today, okay? Pretty simple. You can break it up into n applications in AppDynamics, but it goes further than just applications. And here's how we did that. This is what it looks like when you break it up. So this is the problem set. In this case, there are 2 different applications on the same server, but we broke it up into 2 different tiers. Okay, and that's one way that you can break it up. But this is essentially what we wanted to achieve and what customers wanted to see, more or less. Different variations of this too. Now, before, there's an AppDynamics agent.ini file where you would place the configurations for the PHP agent. Today, it's a little more cascading than that. We also support reading from more configuration files. So you still place your parent configuration, parent configs in the agent.ini file, but the Apache config file, or if you're running Nginx, the server blocks or PHP FBM pools, we can read from those as well. And then taking it a step further, if you have an htaccess file, we can also read from that as well. So I'll show you what the configurations are that you can now pass down to these. These are, so I set the same configs, but these are the configs that you can now pass down into your different configuration files, okay? So you're probably already imagining how this works. Host name, port name, application name, you can create unique tier names, unique node names, etc. Account name and account access key if you're trying to point to different controllers. But if you're not, then you can move those to the agent.ini file and just have unique htaccess files per application. Matter of fact, the way that Apache works is it could also be per directory as well. And that's what I meant by each applications being broken up into different variations. So what's the impact? What this means is that you can have custom configurations based off of how you run your business. The different teams, different responsibilities, different baselining, different thresholds, right? What matters to you and how you want to configure it. This is an example of a Apache config file. So if you're defining your virtual hosts in your Apache config file, you can also pass the agent configs in that as well. And we also inherit those by the agents. Here's a screenshot example of what that possibly looks like. Now, normally this would have been the same node, same tier. So those 2 exit calls you would have seen coming out of the same PHP app. But for all intents and purposes, these are 2 different applications. Now they look like 2 different applications in AppDynamics. So, and of course, if you break it up into multiple applications, you still get the benefit of cross-app correlation. So if these are 2 different applications, API dot or login not, one's consuming the other, right? You can still see the benefit of the correlation in the cross-app view. So that's pretty cool. Very excited about that. Here's another screenshot of what that looks like with the cross-app correlation. And we're calling this feature multi-node support for PHP. This one was a big demand, big ask for. So I'm pretty excited about this. Few points to consider. It is available for beta after AppSphere. So if you are interested in getting access to it, I'm more than happy to work with you guys. So definitely see me after this talk. A 4.2 controller is recommended. I know upgrading is also something to take into consideration, but a 4.2 controller, I say recommended, but if you have to use a 4.1 controller, it's probably best that we probably have a conversation about that. We can support it if need be. all apps will share the same proxy on the server. So this is going to be interesting. And we can discuss this more in detail afterwards if you guys have questions, but I did want to kind of touch on that. The PHP agent does communicate to the controller via a Java process called the Java proxy on the server. And what that essentially means is that you're going to be using the same proxy. So even if you have 10 different nodes or tiers or unique business applications in AppDynamics, you'll still share the same proxy. So there will be additional configurations that are going to be coming through, which may possibly impact the overhead. We haven't seen anything significant enough to worry about it so far, but I just want to mention that considering that it's in beta. I have nothing to worry about so far, but I just want to point that out. Licenses will stay the same. So the way that licensing worked with the PHP agent was that it was per node. So it wasn't tied to the runtime or to the server or the operating system. It was tied to the node. And now this isn't going to work, of course, considering we're going to allow you to have n number of nodes. So just because you want to break up two apps into two nodes doesn't mean you should have an additional license. Now, I say until adjusted because we're working on that. So if you're making purchasing decisions today, we can adjust for that on a case-by-case basis. But we will probably solve for this. We will solve for it pretty soon and adjust how our licensing works. We have some ideas, but not sure exactly what direction we're going yet. It is currently in beta, of course. We're hoping in GA in 4.2. You will notice that whenever I refer to something GAing in 4.2 or 4.3 or in an engineering commit, I'm always going to use the word hopeful because there is no guarantee that it'll make it in that particular release. Of course, you and myself have probably learned this the hard way. Question? What was the question, sorry? The question was, do you have 2 machine agents, and how does that work? That's a good question. It's a question that we actually asked, and we're still working on right now. Yeah, we haven't solved for it yet, but we do have some ideas. We have a few different solutions on the table right now, and we're working through the best way to solve for it. But that is a good question, and I mean, it's a very relevant question. Don't know yet, but it's definitely going to be solved for. The Java proxy, and this applies to all of you guys, PHP, Node.js, and Python. The Java proxy is being replaced with the lib agent. All right, this has been a huge ask. I thought I should point this out at this point. Engineering has committed for it. It's most likely going to be in 2016. Excuse me, at least for a beta. Node.js will see it first. With Node.js, it won't live as a separate process. It's being written in native code. It's going to live in the Node.js process. For PHP, it'll probably be a separate daemon as well as with Python. Like some other people, I've also caught something this week. Excuse me. All right, Node.js deep dive. Okay, so challenge. Let's set the stage. Heavy memory consumption by the Node.js application. So this is what I talked about earlier about the memory leaks. Now, I have searched far and wide. If anybody here knows a way to diagnose memory leaks in Node.js, raise your hand. Yeah, me neither. It's very difficult in any language to know exactly what's causing the memory leak. It's a pain point. It is something that a lot of customers, not a lot of customers, actually the largest customers, this actually was born by a conversation that we had with a particular customer, very, very large customer, not a customer of ours, but it was Yahoo, who arguably is probably the largest Node.js deployment in the world, at least at the time it was, back in 2013, almost 2 years ago. They rewrote their entire front-end consumer-facing layer from PHP to Node.js. They've significantly reduced the amount of infrastructure needed for it, so they've definitely proven the business case as to why Node.js is technologically superior. However, their biggest problem, and this is the same thing that almost every language faces, is you finally have someone that's pushing it to the limits and seeing problems that no one else has solved for. We've seen this with Facebook and PHP, obviously. So they had to solve for it themselves. Anyway, long story short, they had a problem which was memory leaks. There was no solution on the market for it. There are different ways to, try to diagnose it. But the way that we approach the problem is what we're calling our memory leak diagnostics feature. Before I get into too much detail as to how this works, I did want to kind of outline some some points about the V8 engine itself that you may want to consider. I did want to include some slides and go into detail as to how memory leaks work, the symptoms of it, how to avoid it, etc. But I didn't have time for this particular talk, but I did write a blog post about it. So if you are interested, you can find it in our AppDynamics blog. But I did want to point out, though, that Node.js does not manage your memory. V8 does. Okay, so keep that in mind. They're two separate projects. V8 is the JavaScript engine that Google built that powers Chrome. Node.js essentially took that, built a wrapper around it, and executes JavaScript on the server. V8 is still responsible for managing your memory. There's pros and cons to this. The pro, obviously, is you don't have to worry about it. Okay? You don't have to write code to manage it. The con is that you're at the mercy of V8's ability to manage the memory. V8 is at the mercy of you being able to write code that doesn't have memory leaks. Sometimes those two relationships are not synergetic. The way that we solve for it are two different features that we came out with. One of them is object instance tracking. You've probably seen this already. I think it's a Java agent that has it. JavaScript works a little bit different than Java, but it's almost kind of the same feature. When it's turned on, we will essentially profile your code and keep track of the number of instances of different objects and data types. Okay? Now, I'm going to highlight that this is not a feature you want to turn on in production when you're diagnosing memory leaks. It's extremely intensive on the application code, so you don't want your customers to have to suffer for that. Hopefully, you guys do have a pre-production environment that you're executing your code on. In that environment, if it has significant enough load and you can replicate the memory leak, then you can definitely diagnose it in that environment. This is one of two features that we're releasing. So when you do turn it on, it basically goes into effect. And diagnosing memory leaks isn't something you can do within 1 or 2 minutes. You probably want to run it for about 30. I don't have recommended usage on this. I found that it actually differs depending on the environment, on your application code, on some of the frameworks that you guys are running, how you're deploying your code, etc. So what I have found is that you do want somewhere around 30 minutes to try to locate the memory leak. When you double-click on one of the objects, you get a little more information about the behavior of the V8 garbage collection clearing it out. Now, if you had a memory leak, you probably would see that it's not actually being cleared out, right? So over time, it's starting to grow. The other feature that we are releasing, so that feature actually came out on 4.1. I mentioned that in the slide previously. In 4.2, we're releasing allocation tracking. This is similar to the process snapshots. This is a really exciting feature. It's also patent pending. Okay? This particular feature, if you guys are already used to the process snapshots, it's under the process snapshot view. It's a new tab called allocation tracking. So it's a call graph very similar to the process snapshot. Keep in mind that the call graph is not per business transaction because Node.js is single-threaded, right? Non-blocking, running on a single process. You will get a call graph or a call stack around all the BTs that we're executing at that time. What we did is took that call graph and we essentially are telling you what the memory footprint is of a line item. So this is actually a screenshot from when it was in pre-alpha. So ignore the millisecond there. It's not a count of time. It's a count of bytes in memory. So we're going to be able to tell you eventually over time how much that particular line item was consuming in memory. Again, there's no black and white surefire way to diagnose it, but these tools can help you get close to finding it. Okay? So a combination of the object instance tracking with allocation snapshots will give you a lot more insight so that you can go and find the memory leak. I do want to close with a quote from a customer from eHarmony, Stace Bale. He actually also did a talk here at AppDynamics. But I thought it was a pretty cool quote. We've worked very closely with eHarmony. I can actually say we've had no outages in production. They're also an example of a customer that switched from PHP to Node.js, and AppDynamics has helped them reach that transition without any downtime. And this quote was testimony to that. Question?
Are you going to support Node.js on
That's a very good question. Are we going to support Node.js on Windows? And yes, absolutely we are. We're shooting for 4.2 in January. At the latest, 4.2.x. But yeah, that's been a huge ask. Yeah?
Heroku plugin support.
Plugin support? Oh, Heroku. Yes, we have committed to it. We'll probably see it in 4.3, if not sooner. Possibly later. I have to say that. Yeah?
Sorry, to step back to Python a little bit. Have you guys done any testing with Flask applications or Django applications?
We do support any WSGI-based application. There's some frameworks that we support out of the box. I'm going to actually deep dive into Python here in a bit so I can talk more into that. As a matter of fact, that particular question is going to be addressed pretty soon. Yeah?
The snapshot feature that you showed, is that supported today for just .NET?
For .NET, I think it is. Any AppDynamics employees who know .NET better than I do?
It's in there.
Yes, it is in there.
It's in there. It's mixes how well it works, actually. But
Yeah. There are some features that we have that have commonalities, but like I said, there's nuances in each ecosystem that make it work differently or make it impactful in to different degrees. Cool, good questions. All right, Python deep dive. Okay, let's set the stage. Python in particular, and now this actually applies to, because I mentioned that there's some features that we came out with that actually have some commonality. If you're a Node.js customer or a PHP customer, you're going to notice that this actually also applies to you. And we'll talk about that here in a bit as to how. But the challenge here was a Python application executing jobs in an infinite while loop. So essentially, it's like a task runner or a job runner that's in an infinite loop, and it picks up jobs from your queue, and it executes those jobs. Now, out of the box, you would imagine, well, a BT has to start and stop, right? So if it starts on this task runner, where does it stop if it's in an infinite loop? And on top of that, each one of these jobs is executing is, for all intents and purposes, its own business transaction, right? Charging, charging a credit card, sending out emails, maybe something that is, writing files to a disk, for example. This is what the loop looks like, to give you guys some visual context here. The code probably usually has some setup, right? There's your infinite loop, and then it does something, and then it tears down, right? So where do you define the business transaction here? Because this is infinite. You probably don't care about this, and you probably don't care about that. This here is the work that you're probably interested in. All right, the way that we solve for this are the API functions. So API functions for PHP, Node.js, and Python are essentially the agent exposing functions and methods to your application code that allows you to further tailor your APM solution. I think that's what I have here too, yeah. So what that basically means is that the Node.js and PHP and Python customers we've noticed are not as anti-editing their code as maybe other environments are. And we'll talk about why here in a bit. But they actually prefer to do so. The configuration from the UI is prone to breaking. And what I mean by breaking is if you change your application code, then the configuration no longer is relevant. But if you put the configs in the application code, then the configs move with your application code as it begins to evolve, and it gets refactored and gets changed, right? So here's an example of what that looks like. The way that we solve for this is that you can create a custom BT. You can create a business transaction from within the application code using the functions. In this particular example, it would be the Python API functions. Okay, so here's the same while loop that we had earlier. Okay, while true, the BT handle object gets instantiated, and you have the start BT method. You'll notice here the do work. I have two arrows pointing to them. Do work is the name of the BT. All right, so we're doing a little bit of configuration here, but you're customizing the APM solution to really tailor to your application code. All right, so this do work now becomes its own BT. You can take it a step further and make this conditional so that if you have different types of jobs that are being executed, right? Let's say, for example, you have different credit cards being charged, emails going out, maybe things that are heavy on disk or network I/O, right? You can group those into their own BTs. So you can monitor them differently. but you can at least keep track of the impact of the jobs that are being executed. These are background tasks, so normally you wouldn't have any insight. I mean, for all intents and purposes, you probably don't really care because the end user is unexperienced, right? That's why it's asynchronous. The application, I guess I'll give you guys an example. Somebody signs up on your website and their credit card has to get charged for something. Well, the actual charging of the credit card and the emails going out are being passed off to some kind of queue server. Do you have any insight into those jobs being executed today? And if you don't, you could actually even correlate the original business transaction with this particular job that got executed. And you can do that by getting the GUID from the original transaction. And that's also exposed and accessible as a property by one of the objects that the API functions make available. Okay? So I'll give you guys another example. Let's say you have some kind of obscure backend that we don't support out of the box. Okay? Here's another example of a function that the Python agent has. PHP and Node.js also has this available. You can wrap your exit call. In this case, it would be ... Call it whatever you want, right? Obscure backend _ of my company. Okay? You can wrap it with start exit call and end exit call. So at least the agent knows that something just happened in between these two and can measure the latency. But you can take it a step further. Before this, you can extract the GUID, take the GUID, inject it into the payload that's being sent into the method call downstream to your backend, and then on that side, pick up the GUID and complete the correlation. Okay? So what we're doing for you guys automatically, if we don't support it out of the box, you guys can now do it from within the application code. So hypothetically, there shouldn't be an instance where you don't have full correlation across an entire transaction wherever it's going. So you can correlate the originating business transaction of the customer signing up to all of the back-end processes that happen asynchronously. If there's something about that customer's particular transaction that impacts the job queue, you can now correlate it. So it's pretty exciting. Here's a full list of API functions that are available for the Python agent. So I talked about starting and stopping a business transaction, starting and stopping an exit call, adding custom data in case you guys want to add certain custom data to your snapshots. We're going to continue to expand this as we support transaction analytics. Okay, so if you guys want to start collecting business metrics, you can start doing so with the API functions. So I'm actually very excited about that. Given my background in development, I like being in the source code. There's been some asks for having a lot of these supported by the UI. Where we can and where it makes sense, we do. Where we cannot, we actually prefer to go to the API functions. There's been some cases where some customers prefer not to. It's actually rare. It's more common in the Java environments. When it comes to, for example, I would say on the most extreme level, it's Node.js. These guys actually prefer to go into the code. I'd say PHP is next, and then Python is a trailing third. Question?
So you mentioned, all these API functions are also available for Node.js.
There may be one or two of them that there's some discrepancies. We solve for them on a case-by-case basis. It's usually by what particular problems we're trying to solve in that environment or that ecosystem. So some of them may not apply, but for the most part they do. Starting and stopping a BT, obviously everybody shares. Grabbing the correlation header, creating a custom exit call, all of those we do. Some of them may differ. I made it very clear before, but in case there's any doubt, PHP, Node.js, and Python have API functions. Question?
Will these come to C# and Java?
It's a good question. I don't have any impact on those roadmaps, so I cannot answer or speak to that. That is a good question, though. Yeah? Let's chat afterwards about that use case. There's a few different ways that my mind is probably wondering how that would work, but that's a good question, though. Alrighty. We did have, right out of the gates when we GA'd, a customer, in this case Gannett, that was very active in our both alpha and beta phase. And I wanted to include a quote from them. The new Python agent by AppDynamics brought visibility that we've come to expect from AppDynamics platform. It didn't take long for them to qualify AppDynamics as the solution for their extremely large Python deployments. Now, in their case, it was actually over 3,000 Python instances. It's going to continue to grow, and they've been a customer for quite some time, a Python customer since we GA'd, Python user since alpha. This is a screenshot of their environment. So if you are running Python, I'm very, very proud to say that we support some of the largest environments. Of course, that's by the power of being built on the AppDynamics core APM platform. So we do what I call dive deep and go wide. So we go deep in the particular runtime and the application, and we go wide, of course, via the correlation. Now, that's an example of the cross-application view right there. Normally, you would see that either as an exit call, right? But in this case, their environment was broken up by what the new popular design pattern of microservices, so they needed the cross-application view. Now, they do consume each other a lot, so they get the benefit of the latency measurements between the applications. Cool. So that wraps it up for PHP, Node.js, and Python. I do want to end with developer trends that I've noticed, and I kind of wanted to make this a little more conversational, get some feedback from you guys. But I'm going to set the stage and kind of talk about what I mean by trends here, and how it impacts you guys, and also how it impacts us and how we solve for these trends. So this slide here, decoupling architecture plus mindset equals merging teams. Let's define decoupling architecture. Decoupling architecture essentially is what you guys do when you refactor your code and you bring out microservices, you implement MVC architecture into your code, so on and so forth. It's basically the constant evolution of your application code being improved. Not just your application code, but also your different applications that are improving. Plus mindset. Mindset is culture, and I'll come back to that here in a second, equals merging teams. So here's what I mean by this, and I'll give you guys an example. I was speaking to a customer earlier this year, and they said something interesting, which was, we no longer have a separate development team and a separate DevOps team. We're actually going to be re-architecting our environment to utilize microservices, and we're merging our teams so that development and operations is actually becoming one. What does this mean? This means that the developers are now responsible for their code in production. So this is a little bit different than how larger enterprise customers would actually deploy their code. Write code, ship it over the fence, and go to bed, right? Now, if you're the developer, you are responsible for your application code in production. I noticed this too when I was presenting at Yahoo. They had asked us to come and present the Node.js agent, which we did, and I was expecting to see some CIOs and upper level management. We came into a room like this, and it was all developers, all Node.js developers. It was interesting because they were wanting to know how their application's performing in production. At a company at that large of scale, you usually don't see the developers making the buying decision, but in this case it was. What I noticed was a trend. As the ecosystem makes it easier to iterate, makes it easier to deploy, people are starting to shift the transition, shift the responsibilities of monitoring in production to these new teams that, I guess for lack of a better term, I'm calling application teams. These application teams are a hybrid of both the developer and also the operations. So the impact here, obviously, is not only do you need tools to profile your code as a developer, locally or pre-production, you also need insight into, production itself. Tools that operations used to use to measure the performance of their application in production may not be relevant to you as a developer. So I'm very, very happy to say that AppDynamics has been able to help that transition in merging those two different teams. And that is something that became evident last night. I was actually having dinner with the Node.js team from HBO. And they actually brought the conversation up, not knowing I have a slide about this exact concept. Now, originally, my slide said decoupling architecture equals merging teams. But he wanted to add something else to that, and he said it's not just that, it's also mindset. Each ecosystem comes with it a particular culture. And I found that interesting. in that it was, and the story that he gave me was that the team that he works on is what basically built the new generation of HBO Go. So if you guys watch Game of Thrones and you guys watch the premiere, his team is responsible for the application code, which was all built in Node.js, that made that premiere successful. It was also monitored by AppDynamics, very proud to say that. So they had a very successful Game of Thrones premiere. What was interesting is he said that they specifically chose to not have the application team built in New York, which is where their technology was originally based out of, but rather in Seattle, because they just didn't even want to inherit the culture of how they used to do things. So I told him about my slide. He said, that's funny, because we have two versions of our software, a V1 and a V2. V1 has a separate development team and a separate operations team. They write code and they throw it over the fence. V2, he said, chicken or the egg, I don't know. But V2, he said, actually has a hybrid of the two. So that particular pattern behavior was also, exactly what's happening over at HBO. Does this resonate with you guys? By a show of hands, does this make sense to you guys? Or at least have you noticed this? Okay, cool, awesome. I did want to point this out. It's something I wanted to talk about. I found it very interesting. Joe Sexton said yesterday that not only does he want all of you all to come here to learn, but he also wants you all to network. So I thought this would be interesting. If you guys were curious about how to make that happen, or whether or not other people are following this exact same behavior and this exact same pattern, it is something that I kind of wanted to put out there. It's very prevalent in the Node.js environment, PHP as well, Python distant third. All right, what's coming in 4.2? So this is the final slide, and after that we should wrap it up. I'll be here on stage for questions afterwards, if you do have questions about the roadmap. I use the word goal because we're shooting to have these shipped in 4.2. Of course, it's not guaranteed. If you're making buying decisions, do not make it based off of the roadmap or promises, but what's available today. For PHP multi-node support, I did talk about that. It is in beta. We are shooting for 4.2. If you guys do run SE Linux enabled on your servers, we have support for that as well. New SOAP exit calls, we have deeper support for that as well out of the box, as well as PostgreSQL, very, very popular database, and we do support the native function out of the box. And if you're using a database abstraction layer, as long as the native function is being used, that should also be supported out of the box. Node.js 4.0 and 5.0, someone asked that question earlier. We are shooting for 4.2 for support for that. Allocation snapshots, I demoed that for you guys earlier, so we're going to hopefully see that as well. Transaction analytics, very, very popular feature on the AppDynamics analytics platform, so we're hoping to support that here in 4.2 for Node.js. Heroku support, someone also asked that earlier. We are shooting for 4.2, but I don't think it'll actually make it in 4.2 as an add-on. 4.3, most likely, yes. I do know of the initiative that's being worked on. There's a commit on making it happen, and it will most likely come in a 4.2.x release, but very excited about that. In addition to Heroku, there's a few other passes that we're actually looking at, but I don't have that list with me right now. Windows support, someone asked for that earlier as well. We are going to be coming out with support for Windows on Node.js applications. You won't see it for PHP most likely, but if you're running Node.js, it's very popular to run the runtime within a Windows context. Python EUM correlation is a feature that actually has already made it, so we're good to go there. API functions is coming out in 4.2. We've actually already shipped it. The dynamic language teams are very agile, so we actually, even though we have a commit to a major release, if it's completed, tested, approved, ready to ship, we do our best to actually ship it out. So some of these actually are already GA'd. Data collectors, MongoDB support. So if you're running MongoDB with your Python applications, you will see support for that out of the box. If you guys are using the database agent, I just want to mention this as well. DBMon, or AppDynamics for database monitoring, which is integrated into the core APM platform now, also supports MongoDB out of the box. As well as a few other features that are coming out. If you guys are not using database monitoring, I definitely strongly recommend it. Of course, with AppDynamics Core APM, you get to know that the SQL is the cause of the problem, but database monitoring will extend that and tell you why it's the problem. If you guys missed the talk yesterday by Ian McGinnis, who's the product manager for database monitoring, it was recorded, so I definitely recommend checking it out. The reason why I'm plugging his product is because it goes extremely well with any one of these environments, PHP, Node.js, and Python. I mean, for that matter, it goes extremely well with any environment or anyone who's using a database. Cool. Well, thank you very much, guys. I appreciate your time. If you have questions, I'll stick around. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day.